Stage 2, and we've been here before. Last year's race followed the same path through the northeast. From Darlington to the Tyne, where Newcastle Gateshead set the scene for a harum-scarum run-in and a classic bunch sprint.
Pataki on the left, Pataki takes his second stage victory.
Yep, the big Italian himself, Alessandro Pataki, winning one of 3 stages on last year's Tour of Britain, just like, in fact, Edvald Boasson-Hagen did. Welcome to Darlington, Graham Jones. Those big sprinters that we saw last year, Pataki and Boasson-Hagen, can you see a sprinter emerging from the field on this year's Tour and taking as many as 3 stages? And would Chris Sutton be the sort of guy to do that?
I think Chris is probably the most likely candidate. I do believe that the stages are probably set up a little bit different from last year. We've got a few more hillier stages, I think, particularly in the second half of the race. So I think it's going to be very difficult. I mean, those guys last year were on a particularly top form. Chris Sutton, we're not sure what sort of form he's on yet, but I think he's the most likely candidate. Now,
of course, last year, as we saw this stage from Darlington to Newcastle Gateshead, produced a bunch sprint. It's almost the same route, isn't it? But it was a slightly different run-in. Is that going to affect things?
Yeah, last year's route was a little bit more technical. We had lots of roundabouts, lots of turns and some sort of narrow sections, and also we had a little bit of rain. It made it a little bit slippy. We had a few falls last year, and it did split the peloton a little bit over the final few kilometres. But this year we've got a very straight run in, 15 kilometres virtually in from the coast, and just almost dropping straight down onto the quayside in Newcastle, and then over the bridge into Gateshead. But I do think it'll still be a bunch sprint again today.
Yeah, never confuse the two, by the way. Newcastle and Gateshead, very important.
No, it is.
So it's day 2, much like day 1 in fact, but with the added attraction of a leader to shoot at. Yesterday we had plenty of incident and accident. Today, fully expect more of the same. Big crowds saw the Tour off to a summary start as the strongest ever Tour of Britain took to the streets of Scunthorpe and then out to the pan-flat fields of Lincolnshire. With the big boys eyeing each other up, 2 unfancied riders saw their chance, took it, and then built a lead which grew and grew until it maxed out at nearly 13 minutes. Big, possibly even stage-winningly big, yet the bunch's saviour came in the shape of the much-maligned British Railway network. An unscheduled drinks break, while a bit of rolling stock hurried past. That lost them 2 minutes and broke their momentum. From then on, the chase was on at both Garmin and Columbia, 2 sworn rivals sharing the work at the front in a touching display of détente. A few miles from the finish line in York, the game was up for the dynamic duo as De Gent and Mortensen both sat up and let the field sort out the wheat from the chaff on the run-in to the finish line.
Getting ever nearer to the line now. Remember, I tipped young Merlot for Bolo World. Now then, here they are. They're getting closer and closer to the line. It looks like the colours of Garmin Slipstream. Oh, it is CJ himself. Chris Sutton, the Australian, takes victory on the line there.
Chris Sutton taking out the sprint and taking home the yellow jersey. His secret, well, it's all a matter of nasal hygiene.
Yeah, I was just sitting 4th wheel, 5th wheel. Pretty much felt really good, just picking my nose basically.
Unconventional tactics, but it did the job. General classification then pretty much resembling the stage result. Ben Swift and Russell Downing amongst 7 riders to nudge clear of the bunch, courtesy of time bonuses. Sutton, though, leads the way. Graham Jones, is it actually possible to ride at nearly 40 miles an hour picking your nose?
Well, I think I would have found it very difficult, but I was talking to Bradley last night and in the hotel room, in a hotel, and he did say that with about 3 kilometres to go, they were sat in the last 10 of the peloton, but he said, compared to a lot of your races in Europe, a 100-man bunch feels quite small, so we just did one big stint and got Chris Sutton to the front with just a couple of kilometres to go and left him to get on with it. So maybe with somebody like Bradley taking you to the front, maybe you could sit there picking his nose.
Half-decent rider, isn't he, Mr. Wiggins? But have we seen the end of the feud between Garmin and Columbia that seemed to simmer on all summer? And we saw them working together yesterday, didn't we?
Yeah, there was obviously a lot of disagreements going on during the Tour de France.
I think you could say that.
But maybe there has. We don't know. I think both of them had a little bit of interest in chasing down that group yesterday, so they've both got aspirations, I think, to win stages and overall.
Sure. Well, I think it's high time that we heard from the Paul Weller lookalike himself, the man who came up with the sporting quote of the summer when he said, "4th place, that ain't bad." So, Brad Wiggins, the last time we spoke was in the blazing sunshine on the Champs-Elysees. I tell you what, that must feel like a million miles away now, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's almost 2 months ago now, but it's great to be back in Britain, racing in Britain, staying in British hotels, and the support's been amazing, like more so than the Olympics. It's this Tour de France seemed to have just captured everyone's kind of imagination and hearts really, and the support's been overwhelming.
Did you have any idea quite how it's playing with the British public?
Not really, and I went back to Spain straight away, so yeah, it was just quiet really. But yeah, coming to something like this, you kind of realise how big cycling is now in Britain really, and you know, fortunate enough to have a race like this where we can all be here and sort of and show it off as well. So it's great really.
You were a half-decent lead-out man as well yesterday. Got off to a nice start for Garmin, didn't it?
Yeah, it's a nice change for me really, just being able to do that, you know, and kind of help the team out and do something different as opposed to kind of playing the GC role. So, you know, Chris has been up for a win all year really, and yeah, it was good for him to get that yesterday, and yeah, I guess get the race off to a good start.
When you look at that fourth place on the Tour, is there something about it that scares you, in the sense that every athlete wants to progress, but notching up another rung and going third or second or whatever, that is it's Herculean, isn't it, to improve on that?
It is, but then I think like we've made so many mistakes in this Tour, you know, and I was only 20 odd seconds off of third, and I don't think Lance is a better athlete than me anymore. He probably used to be, but you know, he just played it well tactically and didn't miss a beat really throughout the race, you know, from the split on day 3 to, you know, winning the team time trial, and but in other areas I was much stronger than him, like the time trials and that, and on certain mountain stages. I never imagined this year that I'd finish 4th in the Tour, so you know, it's a bit like kind of when I finished 6th at the World Championships about 8 years ago in the Pursuit, and suddenly thought, well, I really think I could beat McGee, you know, and it's not until you start putting things into process and that and you actually do it. So it's good, sort of interesting, and just a different challenge now really. So
Bradley Wiggins there, who divides his time neatly between world-class cycling and world-class tweeting. In fact, if you look closely enough, you'll probably see his iPhone stuffed in his back pocket during today's race. Anyway, here's what he and the rest of the peloton have to contend with today. Stage 2 takes us from Darlington all the way north of Tyneside before hugging the North Sea and heading into Gateshead, 153 kilometres, a little shorter than yesterday. Most of the lumps, and that's all they are, come early in the race, so if the bunch are chasing down a break, they'll have 80 kilometres, mostly downhill, to do it. It's the top right-hand corner of England, starting under the clock tower in Darlington and then charging towards Newcastle. Overlooked, of course, by Anthony Gormley's Love It or Loathe It Angel of the North, which offered the city's football club, by the way, absolutely no protection against relegation back in May. Newcastle and the town across the water called Gateshead. Visitors from the south should be warned never ever to confuse the two, as you'll find the rivalry from north and south of the river is intense. Not that we're expecting any aggro, of course, on the banks of the Tyne, which last year hosted a spectacular stage finish. That's the end, though. This is just the beginning. It's time to hear from our commentary team, Anthony McCrossan, and first of all, Hugh Porter.
3, 2, 1, go!
Mark Bishop waves the Union flag to send the riders away at the start of Stage 2 from Darlington to Newcastle Gateshead, a distance of 95 miles. Ahead of them are 3 climbs and 3 intermediate sprints, and it's going to be a real cracker of a stage. A fantastic crowd once again has turned out to see the riders on their way. In the yellow jersey is Chris Sutton after that blistering sprint yesterday at the end of Stage 1 in York. But what a day this man had yesterday. Thomas de Gent of Belgium, and he's wearing the intermediate sprints competition leaders jersey. And I tell you what, it's going to take a mighty job to take the jersey off him. Looking pretty relaxed here as well is Bradley Wiggins, that man that was 4th in the Tour de France, and of course he's an Olympic gold medalist. He's got a terrific team around him, and he'll be looking to defend the yellow jersey, Chris Sutton.
Chris Sutton sitting next to Bradley Wiggins at the moment. Wiggins was the last rider to sign on this morning, so looking pretty relaxed as the peloton wind their way now towards kilometre 0, and the racing will get underway.
And the race is now underway, so we're waiting for the first attack. And I expect 1 or 2 attacks to develop pretty quickly on this stage. Last year the stage was dominated by a break of 4 that slipped away after 7 miles, and it took to the closing stages before they were swept back up. And look at this, on the front here already the pace is being lifted by the Rabobank team, and they look pretty determined to me. Chris Newton is 3rd wheel back. Newton, who comes from Stockton in this area, will be out to impress on his home turf.
Well, you'll notice already, Hugh, that the roads are starting to get a little bit damp. The rain is starting to to drizzle a bit, but certainly the Rabobank team increasing the pressure, notably as Newton now goes on the right-hand side of the picture in the black. Chris Newton looking to try and take this breakaway.
Newton it is then for Rafa Condor trying to go away, and as Anthony mentioned, the weather at the moment, a marked contrast to yesterday on stage one, when the whole of the stage was bathed in very, very hot sunshine. Today it's chilly, there is a wind, and also, of course, there are the damp roads to look out for. This is Nicholas Roach, the national champion of Ireland, who had a fantastic Tour de France. He got a second on one stage and finished 23rd overall. He was effervescent yesterday on stage one, and he's looking pretty good today, and he's pulling away Newton, and that looks like Bichot to me as well, of Agratubel.
Yeah, it is Nicholas Roach there on the front in the white and green. He flicks the elbow. That's the professional sign of come through and do a little bit more work. But I'd be very surprised if this peloton lets someone of the calibre of Nicholas Roach race away so early with Chris Newton with him. And of course, we are kind of heading into Chris Newton territory because he's from the northeast of England.
But at the moment, the three have got about a 50-metre advantage, and it sometimes happens that these little attacks get clear because the field tend to sit up and lose a little bit of interest. And at the moment, of course, it's left to Garmin Slipstream to take up the chase with the yellow jersey. Now they're starting to get together and work. This is how riders go clear. They do bit and bit. In other words, one rider's on the front and he keeps the pace high. Then he swings over and allows the next man to come through while the rest tuck in behind. And at the moment, the field are beginning to stretch out. That's the sign that the pace is on, but we've got another rider trying to come across. And as you said, Anthony, they are actually at the moment very, very keen, the bunch, and this group looks as though it's going to struggle to stay clear.
Well, notably, the Halfords team have now hit the front of the peloton. Looked to me like it might be one of the Candy TV riders. Marshall's past the riders in the group, and suddenly the peloton comes all back together. A little gap, but no more.
They're all back together. Let's take a break. Well, welcome back. 21 miles of racing covered, and we're on the foot slopes of the first climb, Akeley Heads, and there's a little group just trying to go clear on this ascent. Right on the front, the brace of riders then from Barlow Whirl. That's Geraint Thomas. Cummings is in his wheel. Looks like Lacat, last year's winner in the blues, having a crack as well. And in the black for Rafa Condor is Tom Southam.
Well, this climb is just under a mile, and Geoffroy Lacat is in the group. Notably, he's wearing Union Jack socks today, and the helmet he's wearing is also a Union Jack. He's really looking forward to trying to defend his title in the Tour of Britain.
Well, this is Southam on the front, and he's found a good rhythm, and he has just crossed the line first to take maximum points, and that will narrow the gap for him on the overall leader. There's the standing: Southam first from Thomas, Cummings third, and Dessel fourth, a man who held the yellow jersey in the Tour de France.
He has done well, notably in that group, and maybe that's why the peloton is now bringing all back together now, is that there were 7 riders from Great Britain in that group of 10.
And right on the front of that group, we saw a shot of one of the riders from the Halfords Bikehood team, and he was receiving instructions from Keith Lambert on the talkback because they're all wired for sound. Now there's a little lull in the action here. Agratubel on the right, but just as I speak, there's another attack beginning to unfurl on the left of the road, and this of course is the kind of racing country that can lend itself to continued attacking.
Well, it's continually rolling all day today, and this, it looks to me like it's Kangert from Estonia, the rider from AG2R Le Mondial, the teammate of Nicholas Roach. You can pick him out with those yellow Mavic shoes today, as we see De Gent coming across now. De Gent of Top Sport Vlaanderen. That man was on the break yesterday for 98 miles.
You just cannot contain this man. Thomas De Gent, a first-year professional who had a raft of wins as an amateur, and I was talking to his manager, and he said that this man is really fired up for the Tour of Britain. He was unbeaten yesterday in the 3 sprints for the intermediate sprint competition, and he's looking very, very good again. I don't know what they feed this fella on, but he's got a lot of strength to spare.
Well, he flicks the elbow there, and maybe the peloton, they've fanned out across the road. They're thinking, well, this guy can't last again out in the lead all day, so we'll just let him sneak off up the road. Maybe there'll be a reaction and maybe there won't.
Well, the rider that's with him is from Estonia. That's Tanel Kangert, who's on the AG2R team. He's a new professional as well, only 22 years of age. As we look down at the head of the field, and it looks like Nicholas Roach, the Irish champion, wants to try and pull the peloton up to this brace of riders who he's clearly not happy with. And they've taken that turn and they're now heading on towards the summit of the second climb. And you can see a rider in the distance there trying to get up to them, and it looked like one of the riders from Rabobank to me.
Well, it does look like a rider from Rabobank. We'll try and get a name check on him in just a moment. This climb is 1.2 miles, so slightly longer than the last one, a little bit more testing, and there's a great crowd on here as well. The Rabobank rider really stamping on the pedals to try and come across to these two leaders who are building an advantage now. They've got around about 15 seconds on the peloton. Looks like he might make it.
This is the climb at Langley. It gives you 4 points if you cross the climb at the top first. And I was just looking, and De Gent yesterday finished second overall in the King of the Mountains with 13 points. He was 3 points behind Mortensen, the Dane. Now, if he was to cross the top of this climb first and get the 4, he would become the new leader in the King of the Mountains competition. So there's a lot of things happening down there already.
Well, it looks to me like the Rabobank rider is going to make the junction. It looks to me like it is Kai Roos of the Rabobank team, and he is going to catch the two leaders.
What a brilliant piece of riding there by Roos, 24 years of age, former junior world champion. He won that crown in Hamilton in 2003. He also won the Tour of Normandy overall 3 years later. So that's a brilliant piece of riding by Roos, and that of course has strengthened the position of Rabobank in the early stages here. But these three are now looking very good to me.
They are, and De Gent looks like he has completely recovered from that 98-mile effort yesterday. In fact, he looks the strongest of the group of three. There's the African road race champion, number 31, Dan Craven, at the back of the group for Rafa Condor. Near the top of the climb now, Hugh.
And the crowds have turned out again here. The fact that the weather is nowhere near as good as yesterday has not deterred them, and you can hear the roars resonating here around the summit of the climb. And it is the Belgian that's over first, and that's De Gent, and those 4 points means that on the road now he is the leader in the King of the Mountains competition. Great riding then by this young Belgian. Now they need to settle down to the job in hand and share the work. This is the sprint for 4th place, and coming over the line there, well, that was pretty tight, wasn't it? But it looked very much to me like Van der Walle of Top Sport, and there's Wiggins just tapping along. He was okay. It was Van der Walle that came over 4th. You saw the other places clearly as they crossed the line.
Well, Mortensen in the King of the Mountains jersey was just pipped to some points there, so he's missed out a little bit as the riders go across the top of the climb. It's a fast descent now, and there are some pretty tricky descents on today's course with gradients of between 10 and 15%, and you can really get some speed up.
1 or 2 riders were clinging to the back there. Now then,
That's
is that
Rob
Rob
Hales?
Hales? Well, Rob Hales actually was delayed yesterday and lost quite a lot of time, and he didn't look particularly comfortable there. But Roos is on the front. He needs to start to settle down here and get the job done by pulling the rest along, and they need to share this workload evenly. So it's Roos with Kangert and De Gent pulling clear.
Well, you'll notice now that the rain is starting to fall a little bit more heavily. The rain on the camera lens showing that the weather conditions for these riders are getting tougher as we look down on the peloton. Well, I'm hoping that Rob Hales gets himself back into that peloton. You'll remember last year he finished on the podium in this stage into Newcastle Gateshead, and of course his wife Vicky comes from Newcastle, so he kind of feels very motivated to do something here.
And they were on the line last year, and we're expecting them to come along to support him in the finish this year. It was a cracking sprint, wasn't it, 12 months ago when Hales finished second to the Flying Pataki. Now look at this for an attack. It's the Belgian trying to go away. He means business here, doesn't he? On the line, let's have a look at it. Well, that was good enough for the first of the hotspot sprints. And I tell you what, you can't keep him down, can you? That's Thomas De Gent, who adds more points to his overall lead in the intermediate sprint competition.
Well, I think he must be a little bit cold. He wants more jerseys than anybody else. He's feeling the chill of the day.
Well, I tell you what, he's certainly impressed us, and so far, with a stage and a half completed, he's certainly been the man of the match for me.
He has. Well, it's the CSF Navigari team in the green on the front, and just picking up the last points.
And there are the results confirmed. You can see that Roos was second, Kangert third, and Savini, a new name, one of the Italians in this race, coming in for 4th. Well, there's still a long way to go, but we'll take another break. Welcome back, and the three leaders are still going well, and they've built up quite an advantage. It's somewhere around about 4 minutes as we're on to the final climb of the day. This is the ascent of High Barnes. 84 kilometres to go, and there it is confirmed, 4 minutes and 15 seconds. That's a pretty handsome margin.
Well, this advantage is growing all the time, and as you can notice, the sun has come out, although it is pretty windy out here for these riders, but noticeably it could be a tailwind finish. That could play into the hands of the breakaway. Looking down on the peloton, they are starting to increase the pressure. They're going to start to get worried soon because this gap is going out all the time.
And you mentioning the wind there, of course, Anthony, when they do eventually get to Morpeth, which is the most northern point on the course, they then start to swing back on themselves, and they'll be following the coast road, and that is where, of course, the wind can play a significant part. Getting ever nearer now then to the top of the climb, and points at stake, 4, 3, 2 and 1, and it's Thomas de Gent that's had a superb day, and he's in this group just tucked in at the back, wearing that intermediate sprint classification leaders jersey. But I must admit, the Dutchman on the front, Roos here, is looking powerful.
Well, on the climb of High Barnes is 1 mile, but noticeably, as we go over the top of the King of the Mountains, there's no respite. It kicks up again before the riders turn right, and there's a good crowd up here waiting for the riders to arrive.
Brilliant racing country, this. A lot of wooded areas, and of course it twists and turns, so it's technical in places, and it pulls out the best bike riding skills of all the athletes down there. But the field are all gathered and clustered together, and at the moment they seem undecided as to who is going to take up the chase. Meanwhile, Roos at the front with that lovely, easy, rhythmic pedalling style.
And looks to me like de Gent was thinking about taking a little bit of a jump off the front to take the final King of the Mountains points of the day. Just noticing in the distance we have grey clouds yet again, so we're in sunshine right now, but maybe the weather's about to change yet again. A real testing day for these riders. They've had to take the rain jackets off. Now they're in short sleeves, but they might have to put them back on again.
Well, it's Kangert on the front, this 22-year-old from Estonia. Took a very good 7th in the World Under-23 Time Trial Championships in Hamilton a couple of years or so back. So if Kangert was capable of ridding himself of his company, he's the kind of man that can settle down to a rhythm and tackle the distance on his own. But I can't really see that happening. What a lovely sight that was to see the peloton riding along the side of the River Tyne. And the summit of the final climb of the day gets ever nearer, and it looks like the Belgian Thomas de Gent is going to take the 4 points here to increase his tally. That means that he will have built up a nice lead in the King of the Mountains, and of course he's already leader in the points competition.
Well, the atmosphere on these climbs is absolutely fantastic. This is where I was talking about. They go over the King of the Mountains, and then it kicks up yet again before they turn right at the top of the road here, and another big crowd waiting for them.
That was a nice sign for the riders to see. It said Newcastle Gateshead waits for them now. They know they're getting ever nearer to it, and they want, of course, to profit from this move. Over 4 minutes the advantage now if they keep working well together, and none of the riders at the moment look as though they're getting fatigued. They could profit from that early breakaway. Now this is the front of the main field, and remember there's still 1 point at stake for the contestants in the King of the Mountains contest. We haven't seen much of Martin Mortensen today, the man that was right in the action yesterday, and he's the man that's wearing actually the King of the Mountains jersey, so maybe Mortensen will be tackling the sprint at the top to take the 1 point.
Well, they're onto the climb now, and I noticed on the front we had one of the Vacon Soleil riders, a teammate of Martin Mortensen, who was motivated to take the King of the Mountains jersey yesterday because of comments made about the team being more suited to the flatlands than the climb, so he went out and did something about it. But Vacon Soleil now setting things up to try and do something about getting at least some points for Martin Mortensen so he can put himself back in a position to take this King of the Mountains jersey back later in the week. Mortensen looks to me like he's sitting in 3rd place in the string.
Well, that is well read. Their team are trying to get the King of the Mountains leader over the line to just pick up this stray point so that the gap is not too great for him to try and bridge as the rest of the climbs begin to unfurl. in the Tour. I mean, tomorrow's stage, when we go into Scotland, has got a second category affair, and that means there are more points available, so they'll have that on their minds when they set off for the third leg of the Tour tomorrow. And it is thinning down a little bit at the front here as the Vakon Soleil team try to set up Mortensen for the 1 point.
Well, the riders have been riding at 26 miles per hour as an average speed so far today, and considering we've had crosswinds and headwinds, that is a pretty fast pace so far, because I can imagine when we turn back with this tailwind just how fast this peloton is going to stamp on the gas. It's going to be pretty rapid, and you're going to have your wits about you on the race back to Newcastle.
Looks like one of the riders, what is it, 4 back from the Rafa Condor team as well, tucked in the little group that's trying to thin itself out at the front.
Well, we've got also one of the AG2R riders in the mix as well as we get ever closer now to the top of the climb. Halfords are represented. They had a few mechanical problems yesterday, and just noticed for the first time Christian House, the national road race champion of Great Britain, in the mix. Here we go onto the climbs yet again.
And they are looking smooth, these three, and I must admit, if they keep working efficiently, as I said a little earlier in commentary, this could play very nicely into their hands. It is the rider from Estonia on the front, Roos at the back from Holland. Perfect size of group this for them to consistently keep the rhythm up, but still Vakon Soleil are on the front. It is a long climb, this one.
It does kick up for a long time. It looked to me like Tom Southam and the black kit of the Rafa Condor, who is looking for a few more points here. If you ever want to read a good blog about cycle racing, he's got a real talent for writing, I think, Tom Southam, and he gives you a great insight on his own personal blog about what it's like to be a professional bike rider.
Southam, twice a winner of the silver medal in the British Championships, born in Penzance, now racing out of Bristol. So no doubt Tom Southam of Rafa Condor will be rubbing his hands with glee in the 2 stages when we get down into the Devon area. Here we are, getting right near the top now, and the crowds, well, they're loving the action, aren't they? This is all free action. You just turn up to the roadside and cheer the superstars on. That's what cycle racing is all about. Well, it was Mortensen that got the 1 point, so that means he's staying in touch to challenge for the King of the Mountains contest. Now then, Ned's been out there and he's been talking to a man who's had a fantastic season this year.
Well, Russ Downing, where do we begin? I mean, what's more significant, do you think, the Tour of Ireland win or the fact that you got the shiny, spanking new contract in your back pocket?
Both, I think. Obviously, yeah, Ireland was amazing, and then the couple of weeks after was busy, phone calls, emails and things, and finally tied it down to sign for Team Sky. And yeah, it's not sunk in yet. It only sinks in when people ask me the question, how's it feel? So it's good. I'm trying to concentrate on the Tour of Britain and then hopefully onto the World Champs, and then it probably will sink in. But yeah, it's good.
Has Dave Brailsford spoken to you about your role? I mean, how does he see you fitting into the squad, and what's your job really then?
Yeah, he briefly spoke, and he realises that sort of looking at Ireland, I can win races and I can win small stage races probably. So he's looking at that, but then I'm quite privileged that I can do a job as well. If people want, so I can sprint, I can lead people out, and I can even set tempo on the day. So he's quite happy with what he's got, I think. So step up to the plate and says, right, today you got a chance to win, and I'll try and pull it off. So it's pretty good. It's looking exciting.
As the 3 leaders went through Morpeth with their lead intact, and over the second sprint line it was Kai Royce who crossed first. Then they headed for Newcastle, just over 40 kilometres still to go at this point. Shortly after that, the game was up for Tanel Kangat. He dropped off and 3 became 2. The surviving duo then hit the North Sea coast and hit out for home.
And so now we're down to 2 survivors, De Gent and Roos from the Netherlands, and there he is, just taking some welcome food on board. And really the question you've got to ask yourself, and it must be going through their minds as well, have they got enough strength and power left in the legs to stay clear to the finish?
Well, you just noticed, you mentioned there, Hugh, that he was taking on board a little gel there, and that's what the riders do. They take on this fast carbohydrate that keeps them nourished, gives them a real burst of energy, because he knows this is going to be a really tough ride into the finish. And I've just worked out that this man, Thomas De Gent, has been on the attack now for 3/4 of this race so far.
And he still looks pretty powerful to me, this Belgium, who was a talented amateur last year, and he's certainly making a name for himself. So it's a Belgium and a Dutchman that are together and commanding the head of stage 2, and they're working consistently well. But the man, of course, that's lost contact, as Ned mentioned, was Kangert of Estonia. I thought maybe he would be one of the men that would stay all the way to the finish. Now, of course, they're traversing the road along the side of the sea, and here the wind is going to start to play a part, and once they swing to the right, they will enjoy a tailwind approach towards the finish.
Well, they certainly will. The peloton should be able to move along at something like 40 miles an hour, maybe even quicker than that, so they will be very, very happy when they feel the wind on their backs. We will be heading any minute now to the final sprint of the day.
And of course, the Rabobank team very strong here. This man Roos will have the support in the peloton of Stam, Schneider, Brown, Nyman and Dam. Now this is the effort then for the line, and the points available in the final sprint from the Belgian, Denecht. And he's gone clear distance himself actually from Roos, but Roos doesn't look at all bothered about this. Here he comes up to the line to pick up another useful 5 points, and that reinforces his stranglehold in the intermediate sprint competition. The Dutchman will now come to link up with the Belgian, and then hopefully he's got some strength left that they can start to share the work together.
Well, he's using some intelligence here for such a young rider, because of course it's always about numbers. It's better to have two riders combining against the might of this peloton than to go out there and try and go alone. It's a tough effort if you try to do that. Noticeably here in the peloton, one long line. There's the yellow jersey of Chris Sutton, and the Garmin team with one representative of Cervelo test team are now really putting the hammer down.
And the man on the front there for the Garmin team was the Dutchman, and that was Duyen. And of course they're still out to try and pick up those points available, and the third man across the line in that sprint will get a useful 1 second, and who knows how important that will be when we get to the end of the race in the city of Westminster. Glorious shot there then of the coast as the sea's crashing in onto the left, and the field stretching out here as the final conclusion is beginning to unfurl.
Well, they're riding along now the beaches of the coast as they head down towards Tynemouth, where they'll turn inland. Tynemouth, the home of surfing up here in the northeast, as we see Thomas de Gent on the front, his shoulders rocking left and right. This is a tough effort these boys are putting in today.
He still looks pretty good though, as he just got out of the saddle, danced on the pedals a little bit. Now this is the sprint for third and fourth that is just beginning to unfold, and there is a strong presence on the front of the Garmin Slipstream team there, and of course that is skippered by Bradley Wiggins, and we can expect maybe Sutton, the yellow jersey, to have a crack at trying to pick up some points here. Trent Lowe's another big sprinter in their team, the Australian.
Well, Trent Lowe yesterday had a crash, so he's been suffering a little bit, and we've also heard that in the last few miles, Nicholas Roach, Dan Lloyd and Rob Hales have come down and are chasing back into the peloton. So a disappointment really for Rob Hales, who desperately wanted to try and win today.
Well, Hales certainly not having a good tour of Britain, is he? He lost a lot of time yesterday and was delayed with a crash, and now once again today he's suffering again. So we're over the line in the final sprint, and we'll wait for the result to be confirmed. It was Lowe then that came over, riding for the Garmin Slipstream team, and his teammate there, the Dutchman, was in fourth spot. So the sprints are behind us, the mountains are behind us. Now we can really start to lick our lips at the thought of the approach to the line and the final sprint.
Well, we raced into Newcastle Gateshead last year. The run into the finish has been changed a little bit from last year. Nice wide roads, but a really thrilling descent into the Millennium Bridge to race across to the finish.
Well, it's very similar ingredients to that stage of 12 months ago. I mentioned earlier in commentary about the group that had dominated the stage, and this is similar to that. They stayed out in front last year, dangling there ahead of the main field, finally being swept up on the descent to the line, and this looks to be a similar scenario. Look at this, Roos the Dutchman just applying pressure at the front, tickling the pedals almost and accelerating away, and De Nek the Belgium's got no answer to it. Now it's the Dutchman on his own.
Oh, De Gent has absolutely died now on the road. There he goes. He talks into his race radio and he tells his director, that's it. 153 miles of this Tour of Britain so far. This man has been on the attack. You've got to feel for him. Look at that. He is completely in pieces.
Well, The sun is coming out, the shadows across the road, the Dutchman Roos hugging that left-hander curb. He's now settling down to the challenge, and there we are, the aerial shot of Newcastle where the massive crowd are waiting. Is it going to be this Dutchman that can take the victory on stage 2? Don't go away. Welcome back, and I can tell you the lead is now about a minute and a half for the Dutchman Roos. And the question is, can the Dutchman hold off the challenge of the main field, who are enjoying the tailwind, and the pace is being lifted here by the Team Columbia.
So Columbia, they've got 4 riders on the front, or towards the front now, and notably one of the riders hasn't even had time to take his leg warmers off there. The earlier conditions pretty cold, as we see them really stamping on the pedals at the front now.
They'll be trying to get Bosun Hagen up to the front for the sprint. Bosun Hagen third on this stage before. Now Decker, the manager, is coming up to speak to Roos to tell him you really are going to have to dig deep to stay away, because the bunch are determined to try and pull this Dutchman back. And what an amazing ride he's doing, because 2 years ago he was in a coma because he had a crash on a training camp in the Alps.
Yeah, he was in the Alps. He was training during the Tour de France. Many of the teams take their young riders across to training camps when the main team is in the Tour de France, and he was going down a descent, had a terrible crash, and this is him now coming back after 2 years of fighting back after that crash. And Eric Decker has been his mentor all the way through, so if he can hold on, this is going to be very, very emotional.
Right, so under the bridge now, and they can see Newcastle ahead, and it's not going to be too long before they're sprinting it out for the line. And still dangling out in front then is Roos. He is absolutely determined here, putting every ounce of energy into this effort, and it really is Roos versus Team Columbia, and everything they are putting into it is not pulling him back. It looks as though he's going to hang on.
Well, if we look back in the annals of history in the last 5 editions of the Tour of Britain, you'll never believe this, but no Dutchman has ever won a stage of the Tour of Britain. So if he can hold on, he's creating all sorts of records.
Well, he certainly is going to take out that negative statistic, because I can't see the team pulling him back. This is the drop now that will line them up for the twists and turns when they take the bridges, and then it'll be the left-hander into the short finishing funnel, and Columbia are doing just about everything they can possibly do, but it's not enough.
Well, remember last year on the run into the finish, we had a crash of one of the Barlow World riders on the wet roads, got slightly wet roads, and of course when you go into a city centre, you have a little bit of diesel on the road from time to time, so let's just hope that Roos just stays upright and he looks after himself. But the peloton with Columbia really drilling it now. He takes a final drink, the bottle gets thrown away.
Well, he's picked up some valuable seconds along the way in the intermediate sprint competition. Now then, if he can just stay ahead and add those seconds to the gap he's gained, he could become the new leader and force the yellow jersey, who is Sutton, out of that position. He knows there's such a lot to be gained. 2 kilometres to go. It's going to be a cliffhanger.
This is a scintillating effort from Roos. Every little rise is going to sting those legs. His pulse rate will be somewhere up above 190. Look at the peloton. They're absolutely lined out. They desperately want to bring him back.
Lovely style being shown by the Dutchman here. And let us not forget, he actually bridged to the 2 leaders earlier in the stage to make the junction, which of course formed the break of 3. There's the famous bridge you can just see in the distance, and there's the 1 kilometre sign. You know, Anthony, he's going to do it.
Well, the peloton can almost see him in their sights. This crowd urging Kye Roos to the finish line. They knew he was on his own. Can he hold on?
Well, this is the left-hander coming up and the right-hander, and I tell you, one rider on his own can find a better line than a big group, and they are thinning out at the front, but they're running out of ideas, and this Dutchman is going to really relish the arrival on the line, because the big crowd are being informed by the PA commentator that Roos is now on his way to that final turn, and this will be the sweetest turn of his career, because he's going to become the first Dutchman to win a stage in the Tour of Britain.
Well, he got himself out of the saddle there. there. He urged those legs just a little bit more. He's going to go down the descent now. He gets a little bit of respite. Look at the peloton. They're in full cry now. They can just sense if they can get a little bit more, they could bring him back before the finish.
And the speed that's being applied at the front of the main field is causing it to fracture. Daylight is appearing amongst the wheels as they take that left-hander. There's a sense of urgency, isn't there, that's rippling all the way through the bunch. But they're not going to catch the Dutchman. He's had a fantastic day. Here he comes up to the line. The stage victory, stage 2 in Newcastle Gateshead, goes to the Dutchman, Kai Roos, and he's loving every moment of it. Now look at the sprint behind, beginning to unfurl. What a gallop for the line this is. A fantastic charge for the line. And it's Christoph that takes it from Joker Bianchi, and behind him was Bosenhagen of Colombia that finished third on the stage. But the day belonged to this man, and I believe Roos means giant in Dutch, and he certainly was that today.
And that's how winning feels when you've earned it the hard way. It's not often that a solo break gets in with the bunch just metres behind and closing fast, but when it does happen, it's sweet, if a little hard to explain.
Riding, only riding, and I think about I will win here, and it's unbelievable.
And that was about as much as we could get out of the young Dutchman without him lapsing into post-watershed English. But a glance back at the riders who came in behind him tells how big and brave this was. 9 seconds was the gap to a bunch which contained 89 riders. So Kai Royce takes stage 2, a rider whose name wasn't even on the starting list until the night before the tour, and whose name incidentally means giant in Dutch. 6th place, added to yesterday's second, handed Barlow World's Italian neo-pro Mikel Merlo the points jersey worn by the rider who places highest day in, day out. Have-a-go hero Thomas de Gent fell off the back of the bunch to finish alone, 2 minutes 10 seconds down. Then he had to turn around and head for the podium. Once there, he collected the first half of his reward for another lunatic assault on the intermediates, snatching 13 of the 15 sprint points available. And after a split-second change, the magic of television sees him back on the podium in the polka dot jersey this time. Now, that's considered the more prestigious of the two, so that is what he wears tomorrow on the road.
I'm gonna try to defend both of them, so I need to go in the attack a few more times, but I think I don't go tomorrow because after 2 days my legs are a bit tired.
But despite his kamikaze heroics, the yellow jersey and the day belong to Royce. 2 years ago he was in a coma fighting for his life, and if sport means anything at all, it means this much. Eric Decker, his director sportif, understands better than most.
Today he showed something what he proved that when he was amateur under 23. He did such things like this when he was under 23 after 1 year pro, because I think it's his 3rd year. After 1 year pro he had an accident in the Alps and he was in coma and he struggled for 2 years. And well, last summer, actually in July, Tour of Austria, I was with him riding, and that was the first race. He was really coming back on a certain level, and now he's leading the Tour of Britain.
I was riding on the front and looking behind me, and then Thomas was gone. I don't know what happened with him, but yeah, I think then riding for a win, and yeah, it's beautiful.
Royce then heads the GC clear by a significant 16 seconds, courtesy of his time bonus, as well as the 9-second advantage he rode out over the bunch. Chris Sutton drops to second. Joker Bianchi's Alex Christoph is at 19 seconds. Mikel Merlo a second behind him, with Bosenhagen and Russ Downing lurking in 5th and 6th. Geoffroy Lecatre is in 29th place, only 26 seconds down though. Ben Swift at 33 seconds, Steve Cummings at 37 seconds, and Bradley Wiggins still waiting to show, back in 88th place, but also at 37 seconds. So the banks of the Tyne have done their job and they've thrown up a new yellow jersey. Eric Royce, an extraordinary story really. He wasn't even on Rabobank's initial starting list, and here he is wearing the yellow jersey. Graham, just chatting to Eric there, he told me that a couple of years ago the lad actually had a serious accident and ended up in a coma. So, I mean, doubly extraordinary what he's achieved today.
It is. I didn't know that story until you told me. So to come back from that sort of injury is fantastic, and I'm sure he'll be delighted with a win today.
And in that sort of breakaway, where there's only 3 guys in the first place, then it becomes 2, and then 1 with still some distance to go. To resist the temptation not just to sit up and give up the ghost must be, I mean, an act of will that's extraordinary, really.
That's correct, because I was all day long I've been saying, break of 3, bunch will keep them at distance and then chase them down towards the end. And when the gap was coming down, I thought, oh well, it's going to be a bunch sprint again, and I would have put money on it. But the fact that he managed to stay away, particularly on the last 15 kilometres when it's virtually straight in on a dual carriageway, I know for a fact that the peloton were moving at something like 70 kilometres an hour. So to stay out there on your own is unbelievable, really.
Yeah, some unhappy sprinters in that big bunch today when they came in for sure. But it might be their day again tomorrow. What do you reckon?
It will be. I think there are a few climbs tomorrow, but they do come quite a long way from the finish. So I do expect a bunch sprint again tomorrow.
Yep, we go north of the border tomorrow from Peebles down to Gretna Green, back on the English border. Do join us again at the normal time at 7 o'clock on ITV4. See you tomorrow.